Hey, what's up, Bible 10? We've got just two things on the radar today that you guys got to take care of. It's a pretty short class. We're finishing up the controversy passage unit. And so, first thing you got to do is take that controversy passages mini assessment. You'll find it in the quizzes tab, and it's called Controversy Passages Mini Assessment. Um, Everybody's answers are going to be in different orders. Everybody's questions are going to be in different orders, and you can't backtrack. So make sure you triple check your question before you hit next. Also, I've made it so that you can't see your score until I unlock it, which is when everybody's done taking it. And so that's that. Or you'll see your score, but you won't see what you got wrong or right, because I want to make sure you're not sharing answers with each other. So that's the first thing you're going to do. And then the second thing you're going to do is this exit ticket. You're going to agree and disagree with me on something. As you watch this, there will be multiple points that I make. I'm going to do that worksheet, and I want you to either agree with me or disagree with me about one thing and explain why you disagree and explain why you agree. So number one is, after watching what I'm about to post, what's one group or point that you think I really did a good job on? Like, yeah, Seals, you nailed it on that one. And two, what's something you think I totally missed it on? Like, that's wrong. These people are not the same today. All right, so everybody has different opinions, and so that's why I'm exposing myself to your disagreement. So here we go. Let's do this thing. This is the worksheet, and I'm just going to go through filling it out. Now, the reason it's important to watch this and not just look at whatever I post is because I'm going to explain my rationale behind all of these things. All right, so the Pharisees, they were religious leaders. They cared about holiness a lot and being right. And then they also, many of them were rabbis and experts. So I would say that religious leaders who care about holiness and being right, and rabbis and experts, the modern day parallel, probably the closest thing to being a modern day parallel, would be, ready for this? I'm going to say Bible teachers. Mr. Seals's would be the Pharisees, which is sometimes when people get super mad at the Pharisees, I'm like, whoa, bro. I'm probably a modern day Pharisee. Now, hopefully my heart is a little better because I've listened to Jesus. But I would say Bible teachers. Have you ever noticed that, like, sometimes Christian public speakers are often the first people to act and behave like the Pharisees did with Jesus? And so there's that. So I would say modern day Pharisees are the Bible teachers and Christian public speakers. Sadducees and the Herodians. Here's some things we know about them. They were rich. We know that they were politically empowered, and they had religious affiliations. And in today's society, here's who I would say this is. I would say that these people are American politicians. Because if you think about it, oftentimes once a person is in politics for a while, especially if they're in the federal branch, eventually they work out some deals and they make some pretty good money. Not from being a politician, but because of the connections they make. Hello, Sadducees and Herodians. Also, they are politically empowered. And if you notice that almost all of them have some sort of religious affiliation, whether it's like loose or not, like every president up till now that's been elected has been a professing Christian, right? And so Sadducees and Herodians, I would say that they're like American politicians. Zealots and Sicarii were violent people who killed and died for their beliefs. And they were fanatics or radicals. And I would say that the modern Zealots and Sicarii, ready for this, would be the modern day terrorist. Because if you think about it, Rome was the government at the time, and the terrorists, Zealots and Sicarii, staged revolts where they would kill mass amounts of people. And so they, of course, they said that they had a cause. They were willing to die for it. They were willing to kill for it. So I would say terrorists would be like one of these groups. The Essenes, these people were isolated. These people were religious. And they were isolated because they're religious, right? Because they felt like, believed the world was corrupt. And so, if you think about this, now the obvious people who look like this in today's society are the Amish, because if you don't know who the Amish are, in Lancaster County in Pennsylvania, there's a group of people who refuse to use electricity and dress very simply because they do not want to look like the rest of society. And so I would say, yes, obviously, they are much like that. But the Essenes weren't always quite so radical. And so I would even say a toned down version of this would be, I'm going to put in some because it's not all, some homeschoolers. Now, I say this because of knowing some homeschool friends who believe that the way that education happens is corrupt and wrong, or some who believe that the wrong worldview or wrong ideas about God or morality might be taught if they get sent to a traditional school. And so they homeschool for that reason, which is a very Essenes thing to do. So there's that. Oops. The Romans. The Romans were the imperial power. They were the military presence in most of the world, and often hated by those they occupied. And I would say that the closest thing that we have to this in the modern world is going to be not just the country, because if we're talking about like Roman soldiers in particular, I would say the United States military. And here's why I say this. The U.S. has military bases in at least 80 countries of the world. And so not only is there a fixed military presence in the United States as like part of the defense of our country, they are also stationed everywhere else, involved in conflicts and things across the globe. Now, depending if you're an American, you're going to say this is amazing because we're like protecting the world and watching out for everybody and making sure that it's going well. If you were a Roman, you probably would have said the same thing. However, if you're one of those people that lives in one of those countries where there is a military presence, there is the possibility of not being big fans of those soldiers. Now, this isn't a perfect parallel, but I would say in the modern world, this might be the closest thing that we've got to Romans. The tax collectors. These people are traitors and dishonest. But they were, because of their being traitors and dishonest, they were rich and hated because of their job. Cool. Now, again, it's one of those things that I don't think applies to everybody in this group, but I would say that sometimes there are assumptions that people make about lawyers. Now, if you are a lawyer or your parents are a lawyer, I'm sure they're not this kind of lawyer. However, there is a stereotype about lawyers that they are willing to be dishonest in order to make money off of either their client or the people that their client is trying to sue. And so that type of lawyer who is in it for the money and not for the justice, some people, they get that reputation of, so here, let's put it this way, unethical lawyers, that they're willing to be traitorous and dishonest in order to get rich, and often they do get rich, but also people make jokes about lawyers who get rich by being dishonest human beings. So I would say that's probably the closest thing in our society. Maybe there's something else that I'm not thinking of. The disabled or chronically ill. Now, this is really important, that we can't just say, oh yeah, disabled and chronically ill here, because think about the assumptions in first century Palestine. The assumption was, if you were disabled or chronically ill, your condition is because of your sin or because of someone, is because of your sin or because of your parents' sin. So that's the first thing. The next thing is that you were shunned by society, right? You had, especially if you had like a disease like leprosy, or you had to live outside of the community, and if you ever had to come into town, you would have to shout unclean, unclean, unclean as you walked through the streets. because people wouldn't want to be around you. And so I would say that probably the closest thing, if we're looking at conditioned because of sin and shunned by society, I would say maybe the closest thing that we have to the disabled or chronically ill in modern society is the homeless population. And I say this because oftentimes people assume that people are in that condition because of their sin, or because of someone that they're close to's sin. And if we're honest, oftentimes the homeless community is shunned by society based off of those assumptions, whether it like assumptions of drug abuse or assumptions of mental illness or something like this. They get shunned, and then like we get the same result as the first century disabled or chronically ill. The last is the unclean, and the unclean would be normal people that violated some sort of, I guess, a minor law, or some people who violated some sort of minor law, or people who need to stay away, right? Just to make society function. And so I would say that probably it's not like, oh, they're such sinners or whatever, but it's like normal people. And so I would say that the unclean are people that like people that either violate social norms. I'm going to give you some examples of these, or people who are just sick, like physically sick. Especially in a time like now, we know, like, okay, the version of unclean, like in the same way that the ancient peoples would have said, oh, sorry, I'm unclean right now. You can't touch me. I don't want to mess up things for your temple visit. In the ancients, like modern day, we're saying things like, hey, just so you know, like I hung out with Jim and Jim had a fever. And so I don't know if you want to hang out with me. We should all wear masks. So the physically sick, especially in today's society, might be the unclean. And I also think about like people who violate social norms. It's not like there's anything that's necessarily wrong or sinful, but maybe they exhibit behaviors that you're kind of like, oh, what's the deal with that? Like people that play their music too loud at the stoplight, and everybody can just hear their subwoofer. Like maybe those people, or like people who like they're probably just normal people who have a job and do normal things, but they just like their music really loud. Or like when my baby's trying to sleep and someone goes by with a car that doesn't have a muffler and it's super loud and wakes everyone up. Or the people who like hold their party too late into the evening. So I'm thinking of like people who violate those social norms, who go against like kind of what's normal. And like I know our definitions of normal are all kind of relative, but it's like it's not as shunned as this group, but a little bit less. So those would be my answers. Pharisees, Bible teachers and Christian public speakers. Sadducees and Herodians, American politicians. Zealots and Sicarii, terrorists. Essenes, the Amish or homeschoolers. Romans, the United States military. Tax collectors, unethical lawyers. Disabled or chronically ill, homeless, the unclean, those that violate social norms or are physically sick. Now, for the last two parts with the stars, you notice that Jesus definitely did yell at these folks a lot. He was crucified by these folks and yelled at them quite a bit. Interestingly enough, the Zealots and the Sicarii, he had a couple of guys among his disciples who had the word zealot after them. The Essenes, John the Baptist was one of the kind of like an Essene. If you read through the Gospels, there are a couple times when Jesus comes into contact with Roman soldiers, particularly one Roman centurion, and he commends him for his faith. Tax collectors, these are the people that Jesus chills with. So like if we think about it, like the people that Jesus validates, spends his time ministering to, and spends his time healing, are among these groups, right? The homeless, the unethical lawyers, the military members, the terrorists even. Now, he doesn't talk to the Essenes very much because they're not there to talk to, because they've abandoned the scene. And then the people that he tends to get kind of mad at are these people, which is really interesting that, like, if we think about it, the people that Jesus would upset might be the Bible teacher, the Christian speakers, the American politician, the people that oftentimes society looks up to. So it does beg the question, if Jesus came to today's society, like, who would he be making mad? Probably the people who assume that they're on his side, right? And he'd be hanging out with, like, the people that everyone would be like, no, don't hang out with them, right? And so I want you to agree with me, and I want you to disagree with me. That's your job for the rest of this class. Once you do that exit ticket, you are dismissed. Have a wonderful day, everyone.